This is the Horse Radio Network.
This is episode 130 of the Stable Scoop Radio Show on the Horse Radio Network. Ask the Vet. Please support our sponsors as they make this show possible. Our title sponsor is Omega Alpha. You can find them at omegaalpha.ca. This episode is also sponsored by Equestrian Collections, online at equestriancollections.com. Plus Uncle Jimmy's. And you can find them online at uncle-jimmys.com. This is Helena B.
And this is Jennifer.
And you're listening to the Stable Scoop Radio Show on the Horse Radio Network. Good morning, my old friend.
You notice I got that after you said your name? I knew instinctively that I was supposed to say mine next.
I know that we're really getting this, aren't we? Finally.
Usually it's a case of, yo, Jen, it's your turn now.
I know. Well, we just spent a couple of days together, so we're kind of in the Helena and Jen groove.
That's it. It'll wear off.
I know. Like tomorrow or in like 10 minutes.
In 10 minutes, yeah. As soon as I have lunch and fall asleep.
I just had lunch. Just hopefully this conversation will keep me awake.
Yeah, what did you have?
I had a really nice little trail mix, some applesauce, and some water. It was kind of like a snack lunch.
Yeah, you had a snack. Yeah, that's what you have to have when you have the early in the day recording.
Yeah, I'll have a meatball hero later.
Yeah, me too.
With cheese on top.
Pizza. Double meat.
With double meat. Double meat, okay. Please.
I'll shut up now.
Wait, now Glenn's nowhere to be found, and here you and I are talking about food.
Yep.
So, Jen and I get together every now and again to do these episodes, and this is the fun stuff. We can talk about equine health topics until we're blue in the face, and the Ask the Vet episode is a great one for us, and especially these two topics, because what we're going to talk with Dr. Bryan Parrott about today are two things that our listeners had actually requested we discuss. But they're also things that Jen and I both have experience with. The first one is something called polysaccharide storage myopathy, also known as PSSM. And the other thing we're going to talk about are ulcers in horses, which are ubiquitous these days, especially in our stall-bound friends. So we're going to pick Dr. Parrott's brain about these two things. We'll spend the first half of today's episode talking about PSSM and the second half talking about ulcers. Now, we're not going to be able to touch on everything about these two disorders, but we can at least get the discussion going. What do you think, Jen?
I'm ready to rock and roll. I'm ready because I have some strong opinions about that whole ulcer subject, so I'm ready.
Okay. All right. Well, let's see what Dr. Parrott has to say, and we'll get him on the line right here. Welcome, Dr. Parrott, once again to the Stable Scoop Radio Show. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me again. It's always a delight.
We're going to talk about the first part of our show. We're going to talk about something that our listeners have requested, and that is known, one of the names it's known by is polysaccharide storage myopathy, PSSM, sometimes also known as EPSM. Can you tell us briefly what it is? What's the Reader's Digest version of this disorder? And what do we know about it so far?
Well, quite a bit of information has been found out about it. There are two leading researchers, a Beth Valentine out of the University of Oregon and a Stephanie Valberg out of the University of Minnesota. And both researchers and their groups have been able to elucidate disorders in many breeds of horses. And EPSM, which was originally seen early on by Beth Valentine, has been also called PSSM. There are some slight differences because there are different breed differences. So we see these disorders, they're muscle disorders in different breeds, and so it presents itself sometimes differently. The end result being a significant muscle disorder, and it's associated with the accumulation of glycogen in the horse's muscles. And so the clinical signs that we see are somewhat similar but somewhat different between species. Between breeds.
Now, the glycogen, would that be a byproduct of sugars?
It is. Glycogen is a storage form of sugar in cells, and muscle cells accumulate a fair amount of those to be used. It's a stored energy source for muscles.
Okay. And so we've got these horses who are, their bodies are processing and breaking down sugars, and this condition is essentially a dysfunction of their muscle cells to process or to fully break down or use the glycogen. Is that right? Close?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And how does it manifest itself? Why is it a problem?
It's a problem. What we're finding is that the real underlying problem is being able to break it down properly and to be able to use it. So it gets stored, but it is not being utilized completely. And we're finding that there is a enzyme that is normally there that is missing in these horses. The enzyme which is a protein which is a genetically linked defect that this protein is missing that allows it to be broken down.
Yes. Jen, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have about 4 million. I'm writing them all down furiously.
You're being too quiet. I said she's over there making a list, that little bugger.
Couldn't hear my pencil scratching on the paper.
I'm gonna try to keep it as simple as possible because I could just go on and on and on, and then people are going to get confused about some of the things. So I'm going to try to answer them.
Dr. Parrott, we're all science weenies here. So let me see if I'm getting this right. There is a genetic component to this because you mentioned that there are differences in the disease in different breeds. Am I right there?
That is correct.
There's a genetic component. And in the case of both PSSM and EPSM, it's an issue with whatever genetic fault is there with these enzymes doing their jobs properly. Am I right there?
That is correct.
Okay. So what are some of the breeds we see this? Is it technically a disease or a syndrome?
This is a syndrome.
Because it's not a disease because they can't catch it. They're either born with it or not, right?
Yeah, and there's the distinction between syndromes and diseases. This is it's been called a muscle disease, but it's basically a syndrome because there's many clinical signs that produce a dysfunction in the horse's ability to use his muscles correctly. So we see clinical signs such as tying up syndrome.
Yeah. So where did we see it first, and where are we seeing it now breed-wise?
Right. We saw it across the board. We saw it in groups of horses like draft horses as losing their symmetrical musculature of their top line, so their butt muscles and their back and neck muscles. And it was confusing why these horses were developing that when they had adequate fat on their bodies and things like that. And it led to these horses tiring and not being able to really use themselves, reluctant to do their normal work. And then we saw another group of horses, quarter horses, so forth, that would tie up or develop shivers. And these horses maintained their normal musculature appearance. Some of them were fat as well, but they would have this tying up like syndrome. So those are, and so in some breeds, we're seeing that they're having some muscle wasting, such as the draft horses. But in quarter horses, we're not seeing that as much. And so basically, PSSM is a muscle disease in horses with quarter horse bloodlines, such as the quarter horses, the American paint horses, and the Appaloosas. And the AQHA has funded the research into this disease, and since 1995 has provided a tremendous amount of money and opportunity for Dr. Valberg's association, her group, to research this.
We have these two research scientists that they're really focusing on these syndromes or syndrome. We've got the draft horses and we've got the quarter horse and quarter horse breeds. How do you, there's so, the symptoms or the clinical signs of this problem can mean, I mean, it's just like, fever and nausea. It could be anything, so how a horse presents with these symptoms, it could be anything. How would an owner go about, or how would a vet even, what's a red flag? We have tying up, we have shivers. What are the red flags that we're looking for?
Good.
Besides breed.
Well, it generally is a performance change. A horse's performance is poor, and you start to see things associated with that performance. The lack of interest in moving. You say, boy, it's very, very vague, or this muscle wasting, as in some breeds. So, again, many of the clinical signs seen in quarter horses in related breeds are different from those of the draft and draft crosses. So the signs in draft crosses and warm bloods might include muscle soreness, a reluctance to engage the hindquarters, muscle atrophy, weakness, difficulty in backing up or in picking up their feet. There are signs of tying up. Racing quarter horses, thoroughbreds, standardbreds, Arabians can basically have recurrent exertional rhabdomyolysis, tying up syndrome. There in these breeds, the accumulation of abnormal saccharides is almost or polysaccharides, the glycogen and so forth, are rarely present. So I'm reading this pretty much from Dr. Valberg's description of on her website, and those are the distinctive differences between these diseases and what these the presenting signs are. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. So I could go back and try to make that more simple if you want.
I have to tell a quick story because this is actually part of how you and I came to know each other. When my quarter horse a couple of years ago was showing signs of reluctance to move forward, we thought he was tying up. There were just a million things that could have been going on. This poor horse was tested for everything under the sun. And
except the arthritis in his elbow.
Except for the arthritis in his elbow, which is what it turned out to be. So that's a whole other show.
Yeah, that's exactly the situation here, is that you have a performance issue and problems, and so you say, what's going on, and of course these things can be very difficult to establish, and your horse was, at one level it was very difficult because they didn't recognize the severe arthritis. Right.
But one of the things that we did, there was blood work done to rule out tying up. Right. There was blood work, or actually the next step was to do a muscle biopsy, which was a good sized chunk of muscle taken out of his hindquarters. It was essentially, field surgery. It was no small thing. Right. But at the time, this will provide a definitive diagnosis. And interestingly enough, when we got the results back from Dr. Valentine's lab, we actually sent it to University of Minnesota. When we got the results back from
Valberg's,
from there, it was sort of inconclusive. I think we were like the only inconclusive results in the history of this syndrome. But where am I going with this? There is an easier way now to determine whether or not your horse has this, isn't there?
There is. There's now a genetic test that the Valberg group has developed to test for PSSM in horses. It's a DNA test and very easy to sample. We don't have to use the muscle first off, but so muscle biopsying is one test that's still performed. But we usually start off with the genetic testing first and then go to muscle biopsies, as opposed to the other way around, a muscle biopsy and then genetic testing.
So at least we have two samples to compare.
Right. Because there still are, disease entities that, may not be these. So again, it's not quick and easy to determine PSSM, EPSM, horses that are tying up routinely, HYPP, which is very inherent in the quarter horse breed. There are a number of muscular disorders or musculoskeletal disorders that have some similarity and have to be made. The distinctions have to be made, and so fortunately, we're recognizing that there are a number of diseases that can be similar. Equine protozoal myelitis (EPM) can also be something to try to differentiate from in this whole thing, and in these whole neuromuscular disorders, as well as diseases like equine motor neuron disease, which has been thought to be associated with vitamin E deficiency. So we're looking at a whole group of unusual diseases with some crossover in clinical signs, and the clients are becoming more and more aware of these different ones because we're seeing it as breed predispositions, predilections, and now we're, as veterinarians, we're having to try to describe the subtle differences between these and how to to simply make a distinction in if there's a cure or at least a treatment to help these horses.
Okay. I have a list now of 6 different disease acronyms in here. You've just sent most of our listening audience into a panic.
Yeah, I'm good for the business, aren't I?
Yeah, there we go. Of course, I have scribbled down a whole bunch more questions. Most of these are really easy answers. Okay. So it's genetic. We find it in quarter horse and quarter horse related breeds and draft breeds. So it is unknown to occur in a closed breed registry, for example, a purebred Arabian or a purebred saddlebred?
No, it's truly in pure breeds.
Okay, so it's genetic, but they're not sure where the genetics started. It's just going on.
Correct. That is correct.
Okay. They don't know what caused the now. Is it because we can test for it now and people are a lot more likely to take a horse that has this type of presenting symptoms and figure the problem out and move on versus maybe 20 or 30 years ago when nobody ever heard of EPSM or PSSM? That same set of circumstances would have just resulted in a horse that was either retired or turned out or put down. Do you think that maybe is related to it?
Oh, absolutely. You're articulating that so well. That's exactly what's happened. And some of these disorders have, they weren't necessarily all there in as high a frequency, but because they weren't able to be identified, some of these horses that were not good performers were bred, and then they started to spread these diseases around. So not only did you retire them or euthanize them, a lot of them, if they're mares or stallions, because some of these developed not when they were young, but as they're middle-aged. So some of these racehorses were high-performance animals as a youngster, but then developed these disorders. And because they had a successful past, or they're just available for producing genetics, they were used for that, and that leads to the increased frequency of seeing the disease. So at one time these were less frequent, and now they're much more frequent. The other part of that, which you touched on, is they were euthanized. 20, 30 years ago, horses were turned over. They were farmed a lot more. And prior to 20 or 30 years ago, they were farmed a lot and turned over a lot more. When they weren't performing, they were gotten rid of, and there was easier avenues for that to occur as part of the industry. And now we're seeing a change in how the ownership and the management of horses across the board. So horses are being treated much more like pet animals and farmed a lot less. And
so it really is a double-edged sword, though, because on one hand, an animal is given the opportunity for treatment more frequently, but on the other hand, the commercialization of breeding operations, whatever breed it is, putting horses to the breeding shed, mares and stallions alike, earlier in their careers doesn't give us the opportunity to weed out that genetic predisposition as comfortably.
very well said. Absolutely, yes.
And we're
I
treating
think
them.
I've got it now.
And we're keeping them alive longer and giving them the opportunity to pass those genetics on.
Yeah.
So whereas they may have been put down or euthanized in the past, essentially, stopping that disorder from getting back into the gene pool, we're keeping them alive, we're breeding them, and we're recontributing to the gene pool.
We can, and then now that we're able to recognize that we're actually able to treat them at some level, sometimes not completely successfully, but partially successfully, so the horse has a continued useful life, a non-painful existence, so they can be used at a lower level maybe, or at, and so the owners are more, you're seeing dealing with it a lot more because, or I'm seeing dealing with it a lot more because we can work with it. We can change their diets and have them improve significantly and have a decent quality of life, a non-painful stress one, so people are keeping them around a lot more.
So in terms of a decent quality of life, what is the gold standard for addressing this syndrome in your horse? What are our treatment options today?
We found that the most significant treatment option is diet. We found that this is a storage disease, storage syndrome of energy into primarily muscle cells. And by altering the types of diets, we're able to alter that whole process. So essentially the treatment, once this has been established as a disease, is a high-fat, low, simple carbohydrate diet. And they're changed from grass haze, sweet feeds, simple sugar diets, to higher protein and higher fat diets. And that makes a huge difference in some of these horses. And there's varying degrees of how the disease presents itself. Some are mild and some are severe. The milder ones are much more amenable to the dietary changes and have a more normal life. The severe cases, even changing the diet doesn't always completely give them a decent quality of life.
Okay. Well, I'm going to suggest that we're going to post links to more information about EPSM and PSSM at stablescoop.com, including information about how you can log on to both Dr. Valberg's and Dr. Valentine's.
The University of Minnesota Equine Center. The polysaccharide storage myopathy is an excellent link to get information. That's probably your best resource, and it's there for public viewing.
Great. And interestingly enough, there's actually a Facebook page. It's titled EPSM, PSSM, and horses, and there's an ongoing discussion from people, horse owners, and other contributors. So that's also something that it's nice to see that there's a conversation going on about this. The other, we're going to need to take a quick break and hear from one of our sponsors, and then we're going to be right back with Dr. Bryan Parrott to talk about ulcers. Ugh. We'll be right back.
Omega Alpha Pharmaceuticals creates only natural health products. Their scientists, guided by Dr. Gordon Chang, formulate a wide variety of mainly herbal health products to address many equine health problems. And one of their users is international Canadian sensation event rider Jessica Phoenix. And we have Jessica on here for a second to tell us what she thinks about Omega Alpha. Well, hi, Jess. I hear that you use Omega Alpha.
I do. I love their products. I've started using them this year, and the one product that I really love is Anti-Flam. It just takes the sting out of the horse's feet and keeps them moving comfortably. And I know that from using it in our barn, a lot of horses have benefited from it.
You can look for their products at retailers nationwide or visit their website at omegaalpha.ca. That's omegaalpha.ca.
And we're back with Dr. Bryan Parrott on the Stable Scoop Radio Show. We are going to talk now in the second half of the show about ulcers in horses, something that unfortunately seems to be fairly prevalent, especially in horses who are stalled. And anybody who's owned an off-track thoroughbred knows very well what ulcers can do. So, Dr. Parrott, am I right in saying that ulcers are appearing in stall-bound horses? I mean, they can appear in any kind of horse, can't they? But they seem to be more prevalent in those that are stabled.
Yes. Stomach ulcers are common in horses, and it's really associated with the changes that people have caused horses to live in. So we have taken horses out of their natural environments where they're foraging all day long, and herd-bound foraging animals to living somewhat separated, asking them to do work and changing the diet significantly, keeping them as individuals as well as opposed to herd animals. So those are all factors that, because of those changes that we have put to them, in their lifestyles and environment, has increased the risk of developing ulcers. So all horses are subject to them, and we see them commonly.
Now, one of the things that I heard while at a trade show recently was that, and it was probably by somebody who was selling a product that was going to be the answer to ulcers. I know it's how we feed our horses. And, I've always read and have always been told that because horses are grazing animals and we now feed them in chunks, we feed them large amounts over, we feed them grain and hay in the morning, and then maybe somebody gets lunch, but usually they get sort of a big feeding in the evening, and their stomachs spend a fair amount of the day empty, in which their stomach acids can build up and start to negatively affect the stomach lining. So, of course, this person who was selling something at the trade show said, really, ideally, you want a little bit of food, something in their stomach all day long.
That's right.
Is that an accurate statement? Will that kind of feeding regimen help to prevent ulcers?
Yes, at some level, understanding that horses' stomachs carry only about 10% of the capacity of their intestines, small intestines, and when they eat, they should only eat small amounts. They produce acid all day long, and the acid is is part of their genetic makeup, where is designed for high roughage diets. So the acids are to break down the heavy roughage materials that they eat, and so when you have an environment that produces a lot of acid, small volume, you can increase the chances of stomach ulcers by not feeding them, so there's nothing for the acids to work on. And it can happen fairly rapidly because there's such a small volume in the stomach to begin with of food. So horses really need to eat throughout the day small amounts to utilize the acids that are being produced and to minimize the risk of those acids working away at the stomach lining when there is not food.
Okay, you've just perked my first question.
Great.
I warned you ahead of time that I'm big on this ulcer thing. What's small amount?
A small amount would be, talking about a pound or two of food at any given time. So and that's weight. So half a flake of hay hourly to a flake of hay every few hours is good. They can forge away at that.
If I extrapolate that, and they get a pound of hay every hour, okay, an average flake of hay weighs about 3 pounds.
Yeah,
if you're lucky.
Yeah.
If you're lucky.
Yeah.
So that means your horse is eating for 3 hours out of every 24.
Well, there you go. And most horses are on 4 to 6 flakes of hay a day. The recommendations in general have been like 15 to 20 pounds for an average-sized horse of hay in a day. If you feed all of that at once, and horses consume, some horses eat faster than others. They can eat it all up in a matter of 3 hours.
I.e. mine.
Yeah.
I.e. every horse I've ever met.
I know,
Right.
piggies.
Yeah, so there are some horses there that just their behavior is a little bit different. Their eating habits are a little bit different. So you have to take that into account as well.
So
A half a flake a day. So basically, if they were to eat in a course of 24 hours, 24 pounds of food, that's about what we're feeding most average horses, between the amounts of grain and hay that they're being fed in their diet. So about a pound of food an hour, it would be good.
So I'm doing the math here.
Yeah.
So if I give my horse 24 pounds of hay in a day, regardless of whether it's in one big heap or lots of little heaps, that's about a half a bale of hay. Mm-hmm. Okay. So most people I see feeding their horse, they're way below that because they give them 4 flakes and the bale has way more than 8 flakes in it.
Right.
Because, let's be honest about it. What percentage of horse people actually weigh their hay?
Please, everybody, weigh your hay.
Yeah, 0.5%. And then let's say he's not a horse that works hard and he's a warm blood, so he's an easy keeper, so he only gets 4 pounds of grain a day.
Right.
What I find, and I have a tendency to harp on the management aspect of this problem because I am completely convinced that it's management 98% of the time that's causing the problem. Why don't we give the horse 40 pounds of hay if he wants to eat it?
Right. Basically, the concern about wastage and obesity. Some horses can eat too much. Simple as that, and just get overly fat. So some horses have a tendency to accumulate a lot. The thoroughbred, their metabolisms are different than a draft horse. So relatively speaking, you have to be.
So if your horse is getting 15 pounds of grain a day and 24 pounds of hay, is there medically some reason you couldn't reduce his grain intake pound for pound and start increasing the hay intake?
Well, yes, and certainly the problems associated with ulcers increase with increased concentrated diets of the higher load of concentrated grains seems to stimulate increased acid production, which after they've digested that doesn't really slow down. It continues to be produced.
Oh, interesting.
And so you have increased acidity associated with certain diets, and certainly the roughage diet absorbs a lot, needs a lot of acid, but it doesn't really stimulate high levels of it as compared to some of the foodstuffs associated with concentrated grain.
One of my horses is a half Arab who has turned out to be a very easy keeper and seems to get fat on air. And Jen, I actually took that path and said, okay, I'm feeding them, so many pounds of hay per day. Yes, I do weigh my hay. Thank you. It's something you taught me. But what happened was Pi was finishing it. He was gobbling it up. So I would give him more. Well, he needs to have something in his stomach. But then he got fat. And I thought, well, now I have this problem here. I've got this horse who's finishing his hay. He's gobbling it up. If I give him more, I'm giving him more hay and less grain. I cut back on his grain. He does, he's in great weight. He's actually getting a little pudgy. Let's cut back on the grain. So he's down to next to nothing. I mean, a handful just to keep him happy. But at the same time, I'm also feeding a quality hay. So he's getting some good calories out of that. But what do I do overnight? While I'm home during the day, now a lot of people don't have this opportunity, I can throw them a flake every hour because I can just run right out to my barn. But at night, they can go, he'll finish his hay and then he's sitting in his stall for 8 hours with nothing in his stomach. Right. And that's where, and I remembered the product was the nibble net. It's a hay net or a hay bag that's designed to slow down your horse's feeding habits in the stall, or specifically when it comes to hay, because they can only take smaller amounts and therefore the hay will last longer. Now, if a horse who's out 24/7, they may still need to use something that slows down their feeding. because, again, you put a pile of hay out in front of them. If you got a piggy horse, he's going to gobble it all up. So what do we think about actually slowing down the feeding process?
Well, I think you hit on just an incredibly important part of this whole management issue, and this, creating, making sure the horses have enough, making sure it's realistic in the management scheme of things of feeding horses. You can't feed them every hour. You have a bunch of horses, and you have a life. And keeping them from becoming obese, individualizing their diet so that the horses can be in their optimum level of health. And because horses are individuals, you have to take all those things into concern. So your questions are outstanding, and the dealing with them. This company that you're talking about, the nibble net, and addressing, the volume of horses are eating over a period of time is a huge part of this management thing that has to be accomplished. And so, yes is the answer. You want to use that. You do want to allow them to eat throughout the day. You want to limit how much they eat, but at the same time, they need to be able to eat when they want to, because it's the acid that drives the hunger in a lot of the horses. But there are some horses that are easily obese and eat too much. So if you can at least manage that through, through a nibble net, through a grazing muzzle, when horses are outdoors all the time and they become obese, you say, well, they're good for the ulcers, but terrible for their fat. What do you do? And for these horses that have genetic problems like EPSM and PSSM that are associated with too high carbohydrates, and of course grass hays and grasses are high in sugars in general, and certainly seasonal. We want to be able to limit the amount these horses are eating and not develop stomach ulcers. So you hit the nail on the head, is how do we feed these horses small amounts of roughage, good quality, good quality but low calorie roughage, so that they don't prevent that. You have to devise mechanisms like you're talking about. And these are the horses that are out of the normal range. Most horses normally manage themselves pretty well, but there are those groups of horses that get fat easy.
All right, we're going to take a quick break to hear from one of our sponsors, and then we're going to be back with Dr. Bryan Parrott to talk a little bit more about ulcers. How do we diagnose them, and what might we do to treat them? So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
For over a year now, we've been telling you about all the cool things happening at Equestrian Collections and the variety and selection of products they have at fantastic prices. But today we want to talk to you a little bit about their social networking and what a community they have built on Facebook. If you go to Facebook and search for Equestrian Collections, you're going to find that over 20,000 fans are now following Equestrian Collections on Facebook. And the reason is they have a dynamic community built over there. On most store sites, most company sites, on Facebook will just promote product and things like that. That's not what happens on Equestrian Collections. Yeah, there's a little bit of that, but mostly it's the community sharing pictures, talking about stories, asking questions of each other. It's an active, vibrant community, like a little forum right there on Facebook. Search for Equestrian Collections on Facebook or stop over to equestriancollections.com for all of your horse and rider needs.
And we're back with Dr. Bryan Parrott. Jen, you are just, you got opinions. You got opinions. Living in Kentucky, how many horses would you say are on ulcer guard right now?
Too many. Way, 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 way too many.
There's
a lot of pressure here. It's either a racehorse, those guys, once they go down that road of heavy race training, it's just nearly impossible to get them to eat what they should. And then you have the pressure of horses being prepped for sale, where they have to look a certain way within a very short period of time. Again, they frequently lose their appetites. So that part of the industry, and I'm sure it happens in areas where there's a high volume of other breeds as well. If you go to a place in the country where there's quarter horses that have that same density of operations that we do here, it's like handing out candy almost. It's just incredible the number of animals that are getting it, and I'm sure a very good number of them should be getting of it. But you'd see people walk in and they're just buying it, what seems to be willy-nilly. And
Right.
am I saying the name of the chemical right? Is it omeprazole?
Omeprazole.
Omeprazole. How, when, and why should that be used? Because I think there's a little confusion there. If I remember right, UlcerGuard and what's the other one? There's two.
Yeah.
GastroGuard.
GastroGuard.
GastroGuard. It's the same chemical in there. And maybe you could clear up for the listeners and myself as well, because it's awfully darn confusing what it is, what it does, and how we should be using it properly.
Very good. GastroGuard and UlcerGuard are the same medication. They are named differently because GastroGuard is essentially made is a proprietary product from Mariel, which is designed to be used as a treatment for ulcers. Those are existing ulcers in a horse. UlcerGuard is the same product, but it is formulated so that it is for the prevention of ulcers, not the treatment, but to help prevent ulcers from developing. And so the drug, the two products are essentially the same because of the chemical, but they're labeled differently on the tube. UlcerGuard is a 1/4 dose of the GastroGuard dose. And so you can use either GastroGuard or UlcerGuard, and based upon how they incrementally adjust the measurement device on the plunger is either a full dose, which is GastroGuard, or a full dose of UlcerGuard, which is a 1/4 of a dose of GastroGuard.
Okay. So let me see if I've got it right, Dr. Parrott.
Right.
Because I confuse easily, especially on the radio and I can't see you. I have my veterinarian look at my horse, and he scopes the horse, and we come to the conclusion that he has a low-grade ulcer.
Right.
And we need to fix this. So it doesn't matter which of the two products I give the horse. If I give it to the horse in the appropriate dosage, it will, quote, cure the ulcer. It will fix it if I give it in the right amount in the appropriate amount of time, according to my veterinarian.
That is exactly correct. Yes.
Okay, I've got that part. So step one. Now, step two is I frequently see people giving their horse the don't let your horse get an ulcer dosage, that smaller one.
Right.
Without ever having the horse scoped to confirm whether or not he does have one. So worst case scenario, you periodically buy those tubes and you give him the small dose so he doesn't get an ulcer, but he does have one, maybe even a serious one. What kind of health disservice are we doing to our horses by using the product that way?
Well, you're not helping the horse cure the underlying problem. You're probably helping it. So you're not doing the worst disservice. You're not allowing the horse to really optimize their health, because if he's got a raw spot that's potentially bleeding in his stomach, you may be helping it with a smaller dose, but you're not curing it and letting it heal. So that problem persists. And if you go off the UlcerGuard, which is often the case, you're using it for a short period of time because there's situations in which they may want to use it for. They're going to a horse show, they're traveling a lot, or they recently raced. As soon as you stop that, and once it's out of their system, which is only within a day or two, that ulcer, which has not healed, will just start to erode and get larger or worse again.
So his tummy's going to not hurt as long as you're giving him that low dose, let's say for 10 days, because there's something going on in the world. But as soon as you stop that low dose, that ulcer will, again, if it's going to be a painful one, it will continue to cause that pain, and it will continue to perhaps get worse.
So it's just this cycle of severity. It gets a little bit better, and then it gets a lot worse, and then it gets a little bit better. And so the horse is never really free from discomfort. It's just, it comes in waves.
That's exactly right. And, of course, these horses that have ulcers and are cured, if they have the same lifestyle and the same situations that created the ulcer to begin with, could come back as well. So you're not doing your horse a disservice by not completely curing it. You're helping to treat it if you don't know, but you're not doing as much as you probably could do
Could be doing.
under certain circumstances. So it'd be better to use ulcer guard if you're not sure than not to use it if you think he's got an ulcer.
Okay. Here's what I'm hearing from this conversation, really loud and really clear, that really don't give your horse anything to treat an ulcer unless you've talked to your vet first. Because
absolutely.
It's a, I know a lot of people mean well, but let's face it, the stall-bound horse is not going to go away, and competitive horses are not going to go away. So there's always going to be a certain amount of stress and anxiety in our horses' lives. But what we can do to stop or slow down the ulcer problem is to pick up the phone, call the vet, and say, I think my horse might have an ulcer. But before we do that, what can you tell us, Dr. Parrott, that will help us make up a list to pick up the phone and say, what signs are we looking for in our horse that say, I need to pick up the phone and call my vet?
Right. Well, this is a big question. Is they can be simple things as a performance, poor doing, weight loss, intermittent signs of colic, just a decreased appetite, or just finicky eating. And it can be as severe colic signs and repetitive ones that seem to not, that are frequent and intermittent. So with that, a lot of people just say, well, why pay for a veterinarian when it's probably this and it won't do any harm by just giving them ulcer guard? And you can buy it over the counter now. And so I think the biggest disservice is to the client and the horse stem from, one, it's very expensive. Ulcer guard or GastroGuard is very expensive, and you may not be treating the right disease because these clinical signs could be associated with some other disease process. So a lot of people are just jumping to the conclusion that it's an ulcer when it really may be another problem going on altogether. So they allow the real disease to develop, go longer undetected, and they've wasted time and money without it. So veterinarians will certainly help the process of early detection. Are we on the right course? Is this a reasonable thing to do? And ultimately, in the long run, should decrease the overall cost to the owner of the horse and to decrease the risk of worsening diseases from other causes.
The other thing, too, is I got to put my own 2 cents in because it's my show. We have, your own horse. You ride him or her often enough to know their personality. Your trainer might know your horse. And hopefully you've got some barn management. If you board someplace, you've got barn management and staff that regularly assess your horse. And so when something's different, they can keep an eye out for that. I know sometimes we have a mare in our barn who just gets sour. All of a sudden, you had said their performance goes down. Well, she's been pinning her ears for strange reasons. Maybe she's a little girthy where she hasn't been girthy before.
Behavior.
A loss of coat condition, even muscle condition, right?
Right.
You can just see an overall loss of thriftiness.
That's correct. And so it can be very subtle. And you say, well, is this all ulcers? Because this was the diagnosis du jour for a few years ago. And, of course, it worked in a number of the horses and recognized it truly is a big problem. But at the same time, it became the diagnosis du jour, and people forgetting to do to really ask the veterinarian, could it be something else? And that's where it's become, that's the only disservice to making ulcer guard over the counter. Where GastroGuard is a prescription item, ulcer guard is not. And that's the company and the FDA work together to make that happen. And at one level, it decreases the expense to the owner at some level. I'm not quite sure, but I know that I'm not so happy that Mariel has done this. I don't think that they've really helped the care and management of the horses as much, but that's a big argumentative point. We can get Prilosec over the counter, which is the same drug in humans, and that's over the counter, and people are popping those day and night and controlling their acid problems in humans, where the stronger strength medication to treat ulcers is still a prescription item. So Marielle has done this with both the horses as well as and completely with federal approval. So I don't know.
Just as long as they don't start doing commercials for it. Prilosec for horses, you know.
Yeah.
The downfall of our society.
Which leads to a great question. There's been a lot of companies out there trying to have GastroGuard and UlcerGuard lookalikes, because you can buy omeprazole generic. Does it work? Does it work? No, it doesn't in horses. Okay. And that's because of something that they bind it to for where it's absorbed in the stomach and in the intestine.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting.
Wow. We are running out of time. Oh, I hate those words, but we are. Jen, any last questions for Dr. Parrott on this?
About another show's worth.
Yeah. Well, we really could, and these are big subjects to cover, large subjects to cover in a single session, but hopefully that has been somewhat helpful and leads to more questions that can have more discussions.
Well, that's exactly the point. And, you know, I said to myself, geez, this, you know, PSSM and ulcers, that's a couple of shows worth of material there. But the idea is to just get these questions going in your mind. If you're listening to this show and you either have no experience with either of these conditions, or you have lots of experience, we hope that either we've answered a few questions or prompted you to go out and do a little bit more research, because there is a lot of research out there. The most important thing, I think, though, is to pick up the phone and call the vet. Usually there's no charge for that, right, Dr. Parrott?
Yeah, not in my practice.
Okay. So we're going to put links to details about today's discussion at stablescoop.com. And Dr. Parrott has made some recommendations on some websites that have lots of useful information, and we will make that available to you. My great thanks to you, Dr. Parrott, for joining us again on the show. It's always great to have you here.
Well, thank you very much. It's really nice to be invited again. Thank you.
And we look forward to our next marathon session with you.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much.
You're welcome.
See ya.
Okay. Bye.
All right. Before we wrap up the show, we're going to take a quick commercial break to hear from one of our other lovely sponsors, and then we'll be back to tell you where you can find more information about today's Ask the Vet episode.
Regular listeners to the Stable Scoop Show know that Helena and I just love Uncle Jimmy's and his fantastic line of products. His products have the highest quality ingredients, and that is why they have taken off like they have. Of course, it all started with Uncle Jimmy's hanging balls for use in the stalls, and then came squeezy buns. We know you need to reward your horse outside of the stall as well. That is why Uncle Jimmy developed Uncle Jimmy's squeezy buns. Squeezy buns are all natural and loaded with nutritional ingredients for your horse. Unlike similar products on the market, they are individually wrapped to preserve freshness and eliminate mess. With competitive pricing and Uncle Jimmy's quality guarantee, the Squeezy Buns promise to be a hit among horses and horse lovers alike. Learn more about all of Uncle Jimmy's products or to find a dealer, visit uncle-jimmys.com. That's uncle-jimmys.com.
All right, Jen, we did it. We finished another marathon Ask the Vet episode.
Sometimes I kind of feel bad for Dr. Parrott because I pick on him.
I know you do. I know you do. You do. But in a good way. And he's so, like, I don't know about you, but I'm sitting in my chair, like, twiddling my fingers, sitting on my hands, like, leaning into my microphone, leaning away.
Well, I definitely lean into the microphone a lot, but it's so hard because it's almost to the point now that there's too much information out there, and it all turns into mud.
Yes.
So it's so nice when you can get a veterinarian one-on-one without his pager going off and without a horse standing at the end of the lead rope fussing, that you can get really, really pointed with your question.
Yeah.
And get a really specific answer and then go over it again and go, okay, is this really what I heard? Did I get it right? Because so many times when we see our vets, it's oftentimes under duress.
Totally.
There's something that's broken.
That's right. Something that's broken, and it's attached to something that's wiggling on the end of the cross ties.
Right.
Yeah.
So you really It's hard to ask questions under those circumstances. It's even harder to remember what the vet said.
Yeah, I know that's my problem. I want to have a little recorder.
Yeah. So it's really so refreshing to have those opportunities. And it's so generous of Dr. Parrott to come on and let us pick his little brains like that.
Indeed. Well, we are, as I said, we're going to make more information about today's discussion available at stablescoop.com. Be sure to log on next Friday for another episode of Stable Scoop. There's always something interesting to listen to. For details about today's show, go to www.stablescoop.com. As I said, we'll put links, photos, and more information. As always, we love your feedback. So please follow us on Facebook under Stable Scoop. You can also follow us on Twitter at Horse Radio. And you're always welcome to leave us feedback at our own website, stablescoop.com/contact. Many thanks to our sponsors, Equestrian Collections and Uncle Jimmy's Brand Products. Be sure to visit all the great shows on the Horse Radio Network at www.horseradionetwork.com.
Dub. Is that the new? That's the new website speak.
No, it's actually not new. It's old. It's kind of 1998.
Maybe before I discovered what a computer was. Okay,
that's maybe more like 2002. I'm just lazy. But that's it, Jen, for this week. What do you think?
Well, I think that's plenty, but there will be more next week.
All right. We'll see you then.